Okay, the aim of this video, or what I'm going to be doing today, is to show you how to set up a very simple web application in MVC Core 2.0, I think I'm going to be using. And what it's going to do, it's a simple application that's going to have a couple of models that will interact, and you'll have the ability to add objects to a database, and they'll be linked together. And that causes a lot of people some issues because it's pretty simple to set up an application where you've got one model and you're just adding a bunch of stuff to a database. But when you start having different models and you want them both to be on a view, that can get a bit tricky. So this is the first time I've tried streaming it live, but I figured it'd be easier than recording and uploading it. So bear with me if there's any issues. Okay, so we're going to use Visual Studio 2017. So the idea behind this project is going to be, it's going to be very simple, just like a contacts application. So you've got a list of contacts and you want to split them into different groups. So we're going to have a model that is groups and a model that's contact, and a group is going to have several contacts in it. So I'm going to start a new project. And then I'm going to do a ASP.NET Core web application. So if you're new to this, you should never click on this one. It's always the core web application. And I'm going to call it just groups contacts. Actually, let's call it groups app. And then OK. And I'm going to do this from a template, so I'm not going to do it from scratch. And just because I always do, you don't have to do this. We're not going to use user accounts right now, but to be honest, if you're making a web application, you're probably going to have user accounts, so you might as well add this stuff in. It's a lot easier than trying to add it after the fact. So you have some choices here, but individual user accounts is what you would normally want, and then you store the user accounts in your actual application. So, okay. So I have got the chat open, so if you've got any questions, you can ask as we go along. Right, so the idea is I want to have an application where I can create contacts and add them to specific groups. So firstly, I want to create my model. So I want to think about my data. So I'm going to have a group model and a contact model. So let's start out. I'm going to create the group model first, actually. So it's going to go in models. And I'm going to go add. And a model is just going to be a C# class. So normal class. And I'm going to call this group. Okay, and it's going to be super simple. This is going to just have, so what I'm doing here, just to explain, if you type prop into Visual Studio and then double tap tab, then this automatically fills in like a little template for a property. So this is going to be ID, which is going to be our primary key. And by calling it ID, the entity framework will realize that that is actually what we want to have as our primary key. And then I'm going to add a property, which is going to be a string, and I'm going to call it name. So that's going to be the name of our group. And that's all I want in this model. The way the relationship is going to work is we're going to have each contact is going to have one group. So it's kind of a one-to-many relationship. So let's create our contact now. It says model, add, class, C# class again, and call it contact. And then similar kind of idea, prop, and then ID. So we're going to have a table of contacts as well. So these need our primary key. And again, super simple stuff. String, first name. So if you were doing this properly, you probably want to set some data annotations here to do things like have required fields and maybe some limits on the string length, maybe a minimum maximum string length. And those are things that the entity framework can use, or the scaffolding engine can use, to better create something that's relevant for your application. So the last thing we need in this class is a link to our group. So we add that. So we're going to make a virtual group my group. And we're going to put default getters and setters. And what this does is, by having the keyword virtual here is kind of telling the entity framework and the whole framework itself that this is relating to another object in our database. So each contact will have a link, a foreign key to a particular group. And by doing this, by adding the virtual keyword, we're allowing that to happen. Okay, so these are our models are created now. The next thing we want to do, now I'm first going to build the project. So I think I've said this a bunch of times. I'm never sure whether you need to build it every time. I tend to do it just out of habit, because now I'm going to do some scaffolding. So I'm going to scaffold a controller for creating groups. In my mind, so what I'm thinking about with this application is that you sign in, and the main entry point for you would be where you create a new group. And then I'm going to get Visual Studio to do the scaffolding for group creation for me, and then I'm going to edit that to add the ability to add contacts. So to do that, I'm going to right click on controllers, add controller. And then I want an MVC controller with views using the entity framework. So that's going to do everything for me. Whenever you see entity framework, you've got to think database. Now it's asking what class we want to scaffold for. We want to scaffold for the group. And I'm just pushing tab for the autocomplete. Okay, and the data context. So data context class, this is the class in your solution that represents your database, essentially. Because we created a project that had user authentication, there's already a data context, which is the application DB context. I personally like to put everything into one data context, because that makes things easier when you're linking things. When you want to maybe link to your user database, you want your users to link to something, that will make your life easier. So controller name has automatically been called groups controller. Notice that it's pluralized it for us, and then I just click add. And now it's going to go through and it's going to add all those, all the views, all the controllers. It's also going to edit our data context. Okay, so we've got now in our controllers folder, we've got our groups controller, which is automatically open for us. And you can see it's got the basic actions here. And we can see in our application DB context, it's added a DB set for group. So the first thing I'm going to do, actually, again, I'm going to build the solution. And then I'm going to run a database migration. So I'm going to add my migration. So let's call this group controller. And that's going to generate all the C# code that's needed to change the database. So you can see in this case, because we hadn't done this already, it's actually creating the database from scratch. It's also going to be using our models as well to do that. So then I want to update database. And now it's actually going to run all this code and update the database. Okay, so what I can do now, just to show you the functionality we've got at the moment, I'm going to run the application. Now, of course, we haven't put any navigation into the groups controller, so we're going to have to go there manually. But here we've now got we've got an index page. We can create one, so I can call it group 1. I can create that. I can create as many as I want, and these now are being added to the database. Now, what I want to do is I want this to be my main entry point. So we come here, and then I can see, right, group 1, group 2, and then by clicking details, I'm going to want here some way of adding a contact to this group. So this is our kind of aim, is to edit the details view, really. So I'm going to exit that. Right, so the first thing I need to do is I need to add a table actually for contacts to my database. So I showed you this line was added by the scaffolding. So we're just going to basically do the same thing. And we want group app.models.contact and call it contact. Yeah. So I'm going to need to, that's going to have changed our database. So I need to do a database migration. So I'm pushing up the up cursor key to go up to the last command. So add migration. I'm going to call this one contact table. And then, so interestingly, what you can see here, can we see primary foreign key? So it's created a foreign key here for the contact group, my group ID. So it's added that foreign key in there for us. Update the database. So I said we were going to want to edit the details view. So we have to look at the details controller action. So I'm in my groups controller, and this is the action. So what's happening here? So it's taking in an input ID. The question mark here makes the ID nullable. So if there is no ID given, then we return not found. So there is construction noises here, by the way. You just can't hear them. I literally live on a building site. So okay, so we're looking at the ID. If it's null, then we return a not found. So that would return like a 404. Otherwise, we're going to look our group. So our data context we've got here through dependency injection. So the constructor of the groups controller takes in this data context, and we store it as a private variable. So every time a groups controller is instantiated, we've got that reference. So using that, we're going to look in the group table. So remember, we've got our table here of groups. And then single or default, which is basically a database query. So this is using the language integrated query. And we're looking for the case where this lambda operation is true. So M is our model. So if you look here, the IntelliSense is telling us that's a group. So where m.id equals ID, which is ID from here, then that's the single one we want. If it's a null, we return a not found again, which makes sense. Like you can imagine, it's almost like going to a page that's not found, and then we return the group. Now the first thing I'm going to do is kind of a preference thing, but I'm going to change this. I don't really like that this isn't strongly typed, so I'm going to change this to group. Get rid of the at. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, because then IntelliSense can do a better job. And I'm going to change the view. So let's have a look at the view. Views, groups, and we want details. So what's happening here now? So this, we've told it to expect the model group, and then all it's doing is it's just displaying the model name, and that's the only thing we've got in our group model. Look, so we've only got a name. And then there's an action to edit this model. Now what I want to do is to not just show the group, but I want to show a list of contacts that are in this group. Now each view can only take one model, so this is expecting a group. We can't send it multiple models. We can send some information using view data. So for example, this view data title thing, but that isn't strongly typed and it's not generally would be considered good practice. So instead, we're going to create a view model that has all the information we want to be sent to the view, and then in our controller we're going to construct that model and send it over to the view. So let's do that. So I'm gonna just put it into this folder. So add class. You could have a separate folder for your view models if you want, and I'm gonna call it group details view model. Now you might find that some of your view models you can use for multiple views, but some might be quite specific. So we want to send our view, in fact I can make this a property, save myself time, is we want a group for starters. We want the group because we're going to want the name, and you might have some more information with that group. And then we want to send all the contacts that are in this group. So that's a list. Contacts. I'm calling it contacts. I pluralized it because it's a list of contact. Okay. So now we want to edit the controller to return that view, because at the moment it's not going to work. So at the moment this is returning a group. We want it to return this group view model. So at the moment what we can do is this. So we can come down here and then do group details view model equals new group details view model. And then we need to set view model dot group equals the group. And then instead of returning the group, we return the view model. Okay, and that will work, but then we now need to change our view. You can almost think of the view as like a function itself. So we're saying that this function is expecting this particular model. So we're changing this to group details view model. And then this isn't going to work. So we're going to need to change. In fact, I'm surprised that this isn't. Yeah, there we go. So we've got the red line is telling us that's not right because the model now it's expecting this type. Luckily, it's quite easy to fix this because we know that the group is just now isn't directly the model, but is a parameter of the model, a property. So we do that, and then this is going to have to change as well. Now we haven't actually. Oh, I forgot something. I forgot to do. You can go back to the controller. So we put the group in, but we forgot to put in our contacts. Now I know we haven't actually made any way of creating contacts yet, but we can still write the code. So we want to now get a list of contacts from the database. So list contact contacts equals await, because this is an async operation, context.contact. So contact is our table of contacts, and we want contacts where, and we're going to do a lambda expression again. So when model m.myGroup equals group. So that's the group here that we've got from this ID, and then we're going to convert that to a list, like so. So that's just, again, using the link, it's just doing a database query and getting that list of contacts. So now we need to update the view to actually display that list. So let's go to details, and then we're going to go down here. Now what I can actually do is, if I go to our index, I can cheat a bit, because what we really want to do is loop through and make a table full of our list, full of our a table of our contacts. So that's what is kind of done here. So we've got this for each loop here. This is the index view, and the index will give us a list of the groups. So I can just copy this pattern, and this is what it's quite nice with the scaffolding. And I think scaffolding is a really good way of learning the framework, because you can look at the way they do it, and then you can pretty much do the same thing. So I've copied and pasted this code over. I'm going to do a lot of changing of this. So I'm going to call the heading, TH is heading. So I'm going to say contact. I'm just going to do the first name for now. And then I'm going to do each item in model. Now it's giving me a red squiggly because the model itself is not something that we can loop around, but the contacts list that's in that model is. So I can go contacts, and then I've got for each item in model contacts. So name isn't a, so it already sees this as a contact. In fact, can I do this? Nope. No, that works. Okay, dot first name. Okay, yeah. So I don't want the edit action here. You might want that if you want a way of editing the contact itself, but that's like a bit more involved, and for now I just want to show you the basics. So what we're missing then, so this would work, and we could then see an empty list at the moment because we've got no way of actually adding contacts. So what we need is we need to actually have a form in here to add a new contact. So we've got the table that's going to show us the contacts, but we can't add any. And to do that, I'm going to need a little bit more information in our view model, because we want a way of actually sending information back. So our view model at the moment is all about getting information from the controller to the view, but we also want it to work the other way around. We want to use this view model to send information from the view to the controller. So I'm going to add 3 more properties, which are going to be the group ID, and the first name, and in fact, I'm just going to copy and paste the second name, or last name is what I called it. And again, so now we need to add our form here. Now what we can do is we can kind of cheat again, because we've got groups. The scaffolding created a create view for us for the group, so we can copy this code again. So we can just, I'm going to copy and paste this. I'll tell you what it's doing in a minute. So into details, and then we're going to have the add comment table underneath here. So I'm going to call this add new contact, and then we want, so what do we need? So at the moment this has just got name, so this is the bit. So using ASP.NET Core, we no longer use HTML helpers to build forms. We use attribute helpers. So it looks more like HTML. It looks more, I think it works better actually. It's a bit, with the HTML helpers, you had to do a lot of these weird overloads to change the attributes in the created HTML, but this is, I think, a lot better. So, so what we've got here is we've got the action is create. So we don't want that. The action is where this form is going to be sent, where all the data is going to be sent. We want it to actually be sent to the details controller again. So, so the action is going to be details. The validation summary is to do a validation. I'm not going to go too much into that now. And then this form group is where we actually put the information we want to send up. So I'm going to have first name, which again it knows, because it knows the model is group details view model. So it was giving us an error before because the name wasn't a property of that model. And then we want last name. Now, the thing we're missing at the moment is we're missing the group ID. Now, the group ID isn't something we want our user to be able to set because, or we want it to match this one. We don't necessarily want the user to set that themselves. So I'm going to actually put it in as a hidden input. So input type equals hidden. ASP.4. So this is an attribute helper, and this is what parameter do we want this form to actually be. So we want this to be group ID, and IntelliSense knows what it's doing, and then the value is actually something we're going to get from our model coming in. So is our model.group.id. So this is the ID that's actually coming from our controller. So it's actually being input into it. And then we've got a create. Now at the moment, this form, when we click create, it's a post form. So it's going to be, it's a post request. But if we look at our, where's our controller? Groups controller, we can see that the details action, there currently isn't one that is a post action. So we need to create one. So let's do that now. So it's going to be, I'm going to start with the data annotation. So HTTP post. We're going to have an validate anti-forgery token. And then we want public async. And it's a task because we're going to be doing await as we edit the database. I action result details. And then we want to bind and say what we want the model binder to be looking for, and we're going to say group ID first name and last name. Or did we just do a form? I think we did the form for both, didn't we? Yeah, first and last name. And that is going to, the input is going to be a group details, a group details view model, which we're going to call view model. Okay, so this is saying that nothing is returning, so we're not returning anything at the moment, so that's why it's not happy. So let's just type in return view model, and this is what's going to happen if things are successful. So firstly, we need to check and see if this data is valid, and we do that using the model state object. So I'm going to do model state dot is valid. So if it's valid, then we want to add this contact. So we haven't got a contact directly from this view model. We need to build it. So contact, and this actually is a way of protecting yourself against overposting attacks. because we are deciding what goes into our actual database. We're not directly putting this data into our database. We are creating a new contact and then deciding what from here goes into here. If we don't do that, there's a risk that someone could send data up in a form that they created. They could create their own form on their own web page and send data to our database that we don't want. Like, if you should read about that if you don't know about overposting. So all I'm doing is I'm setting, I'm just populating the properties in our contact model. So first name, last name. We also need to add the my group. So to add the my group, we actually want to get the group. So I've got some code up here that does that. I don't think it's worth making a new method for this because it's only basically a line of code. So this is okay. So this ID then is not just ID. This is from our view model. So from view model dot group ID. Okay, so that's coming from our form, our hidden thing in the form. So I'm going to add some space here. And then, so now we've got the group. So if this group isn't found, there could be a case that maybe something went wrong. There could have been an error. And this group ID, we shouldn't just assume that this is going to work. We should have something in here that returns a not found if that doesn't happen. So we want to set the group for our contact. So this contact that we created up here, contact.mygroup equals group. And now we can, this is ready, so we can add this to our data context. So contact.add contact. And then we need to save the changes. So what will happen is that if you don't call this, so you only, in the code you could make lots of changes to the database and they won't happen until you say, right, stop and save what's going on. And then, okay, so what I'm going to do as well, what I need to do now is I need to essentially recreate what's going on here because I want to return a view model to the view and show all the same information as if I came to here. And so that is something I am going to take out and make a method for. So we essentially want to get a view model. So I'm going to do this. And I'm going to, actually no, I'm just going to go here, like that. I don't think I'm going to be able to extract this. I think I need to do it myself. I'll try extracting it. So I'm going to do quick actions refactoring. Did that work? Don't know why it's not working. That's odd. Usually, I'm going to save just in case. There's so many errors here that it's... Usually it allows you to do that. Okay, I'll just have to write it myself. So I want to create a method. What I was trying to do is do extract method. So that doesn't seem to be working. So I'm going to have a private method, async, and task, group details view model. What I basically want to do is like get group details view model from group. So this is going to take in an input as group and return a view model. So it's this code. It's here. It's this code. I'm going to Control X this, paste it in there, and then do view model dot contacts equals contacts, and then return view model. And then here, all I need to do is write view model. In fact, I need to, this is a new, so I'm going to do, I need to define this variable, so equals get group. I need to have a weight here because it's a task. Okay, so I've replaced that with one line of code, and the reason I did that was because now down here I can do the same. So I can just do that. In fact, I don't need to define that again because we've already got a view model. So that's there. So now I'm overwriting that view model, and then that view model is being returned to the view. And yes, so I think that all looks good. I'm going to move this down here. So the reason I'm doing that, or the reason I've done this, is so that now we have one line here that does one job. Or this method, if we change this, if we change how our view model works maybe, or we change something with where these contacts are stored, we don't have to keep going through every single method where we do this operation. We can just change this one method and it will work. Okay, so now we can run, I'm going to build it. Well, it would have built anyway when I run it, but okay, and now I'm going to run. So groups. Okay, so now it's the same as it was before. Now if I go to details, then I've got this add new contact. So this is just some dog treats that are sat on my table. So create. Okay, so we've got, I didn't put the last name in, so that's just seeing the first name. Well, that's not going to help us, is it? So let's just go those. Okay, so I've got, so they're being added here. Now, if I go to my groups page again, details of group 2, and I haven't got ones here, so I'm going to just call it group 2 contact, blah. Okay, and so there you go. So I can go back to the list, I can look at the details of group 2, and it's got that relationship there. So in fact, I can exit this and I can show you, if I get the SQL Object Explorer up, hopefully this will work. So what's this project? Oh, which one's it going to be in? Right, what's this called? Groups app. CD groups app. So tables, we've got our contact. Let's view view data. We can see we've got our group ID has been set correctly and has here. And so this is exactly how you do it if you wanted to connect objects with like users. That would be the same way. It's all done through this kind of virtual keyword. And then the difficulty I think a lot of people come across with is this idea that a view is for one specific model. I know a lot of people find that a bit tricky to kind of get their head around. And so hopefully this is helpful. I mean, it might not be the best way of doing it, but it's a way to get started and get your head around how this whole system works. Okay, if you want me to do any more stuff like this, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.